Welcome to the 2021 Himalayan Club Annual Seminar. My name is Uttara and I will be your host over the next couple of days. It seems remiss to not begin by saying what an unprecedented year we've had, how this online seminar is part of the new normal, and how the COVID 19 pandemic has disrupted our lives in myriad ways. But I'm sure you've heard this countless times now. Instead, let's look a little bit into the future. Imagine, maybe a year from now, most of us have been vaccinated. Masks are still necessary, but we can go to work and school. Maybe our next annual seminar is in person, with people flying in from across the world and all of us sitting together in an air conditioned auditorium. We are back to normal. This means we have to get back to thinking about our most urgent crisis, the environment. The Himalayan Club annual seminar is as much about the mountains as it is about the people who explore them, write about them, and overcome the highest obstacles while climbing them. The so called rest that nature has had this past year will not amount to much unless we find long term and sustainable solutions to how we interact with the natural world, while also keeping in mind the livelihoods of the communities that depend on tourism and exploration. As we spend the next couple of days enthralled in stories of the most unbelievable feats, from climbing the highest mountains in the coldest season to running in the Himalayan winter, to remembering the explorers and climbers who have come before. Let us remember what is at stake if we don't decide to change. I now invite the president of the Himalayan Club, Chewang Motup Goba, to tell us a little bit about the club and to open the 2021 annual seminar. A little bit about Motup. Motup is the founder of Remo Expeditions and the Ladakh Marathon, the world's highest certified marathon. Remo Expeditions has received the National Tourism Award for being the best adventure tour operator for 2 years consecutively. He is also the recipient of the Wildlife Service Award 2014 and the Padma Shri in 2020. He is an honorary member of the Yorkshire Ramblers Club, a member of the American Alpine Club, and the UK Alpine Club.
Thank you, Uttara, for the introduction. On behalf of the Himalayan Club, it is certainly a great pleasure to greet all of you from Ladakh, India. 2020 has been an unusual and unprecedented year, causing a global crisis which made the whole world come to a standstill. I believe that it is in time like this that our sense of community and responsibility has a chance to prove itself. Our organization has a long-standing legacy of not just being a witness to, but playing a supportive role in milestone of mountaineering and adventure travel history. With 2020 being a dampener for most people, I wanted to usher in 2021 by shifting perspective on the year that has gone and what it means for us in the future. In environmental science, there is a term known as natural experiment. With the onset of the global lockdown and a pause on human movement, we saw a large-scale natural experiment take place. The unprecedented nature of the pandemic created the perfect condition for scientists to see the effects of urban routine. Mount Everest was visible from the plains of Bihar. Kanchenjunga was visible from Siliguri. The Dhauladhar range from Jalandhar. Air pollution was recorded at its lowest in 30 years, and carbon emission around the world went down tremendously. 2020 was the year we literally grew closer to the natural world. Recently, there was a new milestone in the history of mountaineering. We witnessed for the first time ever the winter ascent of K2. It was a meaningful moment, a climb that was significant as it was completely conducted by the locals, mostly Sherpas, who never get enough credit despite their contributions. In a New York Times article about the summit, one of the climbers, Mingma Sherpa, said, and I quote, "All of our mountains were first summited by foreigners. That's why we were desperate to summit K2 this winter." Truly, we can learn from this spirit of opportunity and recovery that is ever present in the local communities whose hills and trails we often traverse. Taking a cue from this, I would like to announce a theme for 2021. A purpose for all of us this year will be about restoration, restoring not just in light of the healing that nature has been exercising, but restoring our historic active role towards the world of mountaineering. The reality of global warming and rapid infrastructure changes in remote area has urged us to move on from a passive stance and be more active in our efforts towards preserving the ties between nature and humanity. We have talked a lot about footprints, but it is time to talk about hands that can help these remote local communities have better control over their natural affairs, so they are not pushed to the side while their homes are opened up to more visitors. We have to work in tandem with those who have kept these hills green and clean for so long, instead of dismissing them altogether. I bring this up especially with reference to the recent unfortunate news of pollution and chaos taking place in the Lahaul Spiti regions following the inauguration of Atal Tunnel. While it has certainly helped locals gain access to resources for their own ease, it has also exposed them to a tourist culture that they are not only unfamiliar with but also threatened by. With more such projects in the work, such exposure will continue to happen. But we have to help so that exposure means resourcefulness, not endangerment. I suggest we start devising ideas for awareness campaigns that discourage such harmful tourist culture, which disrespects local routine and tradition. It has long been said, when in Rome, do as the Romans. And it is high time that we enforce this principle upon the growing number of domestic tourists who are traveling in droves from the cities to hills and lesser urban areas. This has also threatened the locals who have lesser access to medical facilities in case of a super spreader event. These numbers will not go down, and so I urge this community to come forward with ideas and plans. We all know that prevention is better than cure, and there is no better time than right now to start this practice in Indian mountain tourism. With the recent disaster in Uttarakhand, we see a pattern taking place, one of denial of scientific research and advice, which has warned several times about the impending disaster that would be exacerbated due to man-made projects. As an organization that has worked with the mountains for decades, we cannot look at the face of such disaster and simply retrospect. We have to do our learning and practice and help reconcile our expertise, our labor, and our compassion, so that a larger net of awareness and conversation can help prevent future disaster. This conversation, in light of inevitable global warming effects, needs to be amplified. With the vaccine rollout taking place around the world, we can start looking forward to a new world where health, hygiene, travel, and movement are completely redefined. While a lot of what we will face and continue to face is unexpected, I do believe that the spirit of unity and cooperation and compassion is what always brings the best in any crisis. I look forward to the greatest mind of the global mountaineering community coming together here on this platform, sharing their thoughts with us. Finally, I would like to thank all our speakers from different parts of the world and our organizers who have given their valuable time to make this event a success. It has been a strenuous year for everyone, but it is all the more reasons to play a more effective role in what comes next. I wish everyone a healthier, better 2021. Thank you, and Julie. 9 years ago, the Himalayan Club and the Nanavati family joined hands to celebrate Jagdish Nanavati's love for the Himalaya and his contribution to the club. 2 annual awards have been instituted in Jagdish Bhai's memory. The Jagdish Nanavati Award for Excellence in Mountaineering for a well-organized, executed, and documented Indian expedition, and the Jagdish Nanavati Garud Medal to honor a person who has excelled in supporting or assisting expeditions to the Himalaya. Unfortunately, the Jagdish Nanavati Award for Excellence in Mountaineering cannot be considered this year as no expeditions were possible. If the situation gets better, we are sure that excellent treks and expedition will happen in 2021. However, the Garud Medal for support staff has been announced. This year's winner is Konchok Tinles for his service to mountaineers. Konchok began climbing in 2002. He has been climbing and leading expedition across the Himalaya. He is a trained climber and a qualified first aid responder, an ice climber, rock climber, mountain guide, and a mentor to young climbers. He has been on more than 30 Himalayan expeditions with Indian and international teams. He has made multiple summits and assisted on expedition to previously unclimbed peaks. The Himalayan Club is pleased to award Konchok Tinles the Garud Medal. I have with me Konchok Tinles, the winner of Garud Medal 2021. Congratulations, Konchok, for winning this award. I would like to request you to say a few words, how you feel after receiving this award.
Thank you, Gale. I am very happy to receive this prestigious award. I like to thank Jagdish, Nanavati family and the Himalayan Club for honoring me with Garud Medal. Thank you.
Our first speaker of the 2021 Himalayan Club Annual Seminar is Bernadette McDonald, here to deliver the Kaivan Mistry Memorial Lecture. A little bit about the lecture. Kaivan Mistry, an active member of the Himalayan Club, was also one of the most respected light designers in Mumbai's theatre circuit. But mountains were always his first love. He was an avid trekker and enjoyed exploratory treks and climbs in the Himalaya and the Sahyadris. On September 25, 2000, on the way back from a venture in the eastern Karakoram, he slipped and fell into the Choyoyou River and lost his life. His family, respecting his love of mountains, decided to support the Himalayan Club by organizing a lecture every year in his memory. We are so happy to have Bernadette here to deliver the Kaivan Mistry Memorial Lecture this year. Bernadette McDonald, AOE, was the founder of the Banff Center for Mountain Culture and has authored 11 books on mountain culture and mountaineering. Her work has been published in 16 countries and has received many awards. She has received the Alberta Order of Excellence and the King Albert Award for her contributions to mountain culture. Her most recent book is Winter 8000, a chronicle of the important attempts and first summits of the 14 highest mountains in the world in the coldest, most extreme climate. In her talk today, Bernadette will tell us more about this book. Thank you for joining us. Over to you, Bernadette.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for joining me this evening, and greetings from Canada to all my friends in the Himalayan Club. I'm very sorry we can't meet in person this year, but hopefully soon. Well, for this lecture, I hope you are very well dressed and in a warm, cozy place, because where we are going will be cold, very, very cold. In fact, this lecture is being recorded from my place, my home in Banff, Alberta, and today this morning it was minus 30, and with the wind chill, they're suggesting that it's more like minus 40. So I am definitely well dressed and trying to stay warm. Well, if you've been watching the news lately, you will be aware of the drama that has been taking place on K2. 4 teams on the mountain with over 60 climbers and support staff on the second highest mountain in the world, most difficult 8,000er, and in winter. It has been an astonishing situation to observe. And I will come back to K2 a little bit later in the lecture, but first I would like to explore with you what led to this incredible race. Climbing in the Himalaya and the Karakoram in winter has been going on for a long time, since the 70s. Despite the severity of the activity, high altitude winter climbing has attracted almost 200 expeditions and more than 1,500 climbers. These are climbers who are not afraid of suffering. My book, Winter 8000, is about these people and their adventures. The book took me 3 years to write, but it's actually been 26 years in the making. It all started in 1994 when I was at a party in Katowice, Poland. I was there because I had helped organize a mountain film festival for the local mountain club, and we were celebrating the end of the festival at the mountain club headquarters. It was there that I met a group of some of the best Himalayan climbers in the world at that time. This is how they made money for their expeditions, and this is how they trained. Well, one of the climbers at that party was this man, Andrzej Zavada. A tall, stately man, Zavada commanded respect. He was a well-known expedition leader in Poland, and he had a rather unusual passion. That was climbing 8,000-meter peaks in winter. Not content to climb the highest mountains on Earth in spring or summer or autumn, he mobilized a group of Polish climbers to attempt what most thought at that time to be impossible. When I asked him why he preferred to go to the Himalaya in winter rather than a more benevolent season, he answered me with a joke. At least I think it was a joke. He said, because Himalaya in summer is for women. Well, apart from the joke, there was a logical reason for Zavada and those Polish climbers to go to the Himalaya in winter. And it had to do with the political situation in Poland. After the end of World War II in 1945, Poland was under Soviet rule. And under the communists, Polish citizens were not free to travel outside the country. Yet within Poland, there was a thriving climbing community. They climbed in the Tatras, Poland's highest mountain range, in all 4 seasons, and sometimes they slipped across the border into Slovakia to do illegal ascents. This is a picture of Jurek Kukushka, who has slipped across the border and unfortunately run into a couple of guards. During this time, all 14 of the 8,000-meter peaks were climbed for the first time. Now, Polish climbers were watching this history being made and were understandably frustrated because they weren't part of it. So when restrictions eased a bit in Poland in the early 70s, Andrzej Zavada jumped at the chance to create a new chapter in the history of Himalayan climbing by attempting the highest mountains in winter. Well, as I learned more about these winter climbers, and despite Zavada's joke about women, some of them actually were women. Climbers like this lady, Wanda Rutkiewicz, and Anna Okopinska. I marveled at their strength and their determination, their stubbornness, and more than anything, their willingness to suffer. This is what that suffering looked like. This is Maciek Berbeka, Polish climber, after his descent of Broad Peak in the winter of 1988. This is the beginning of a long and tragic story, which I will get into a bit later. So climbing 8,000-meter peaks has been called the art of suffering. And you might ask why. Well, first of all, the temperatures are mind-numbingly cold. The winds routinely top 100 kilometers per hour. Winter days are short and the nights are long. The mountains are stripped bare by the winter winds, and what climbers face is glistening ice as hard as snow. I would like now to read a short piece from the book where I describe the severity of winter climbing at altitude. Temperatures at 8,000 meters in winter defy understanding. It's so cold your lungs feel as if they are burning. Eyelashes become coated in rime and cling together. Exposed skin freezes in minutes. Your extremities are horribly vulnerable, and if immobile or constricted in any way, can freeze as solid as wood. Fingers and toes die, turn black, and must be amputated. Stoves malfunction. Metal snaps. Cold, this cold, is brutally unforgiving. It wraps itself around you and around your mind, and then begins ever so slowly to squeeze. It's terrifying. Savage winter winds rarely let up at high elevations on these peaks. For weeks on end, summits are buried in the jet stream. And the winds are not simply breezy or gusty, they have the power of hurricanes. Such winds can lift a grown person and throw them down. They destroy tents, fling barrels of equipment hundreds of meters, snap guy lines, and polish glacial ice to marble smoothness. They drive huge quantities of snow, packing it into deadly slabs, poised to avalanche at the slightest trigger. They roar and howl and scream until even the most well-balanced climber begins to feel he is going insane. The degree of isolation in the highest mountains in winter is hard to imagine. With difficult ground access and dangerous flying conditions, any emergency quickly turns into a life-threatening situation. As winter Himalayan climber Darek Zalewski explains, it's difficult to find loneliness under the 8,000ers, except in winter. Winter is at the end of the world. There's little color in the high mountains in winter. Only 30 shades of white, gradations of gray, and blackest black. The variations of white provide a frame of reference for snow quality, avalanche risk, and all kinds of clues that can help you survive. Black is the color of the rock-hard ice that will deflect your ice axe, resist the bite of your crampon, and glisten like glass. Gray roils in with every storm. Charcoal gray, dove gray, milky gray. Rarely the heavy sky splits wide to reveal a startling blue so deep you could drown in it, luring alpinists into action for a day or two of good weather. And then it's back to gray. Winter is darkness. Winter days are short, and those long winter nights feel like forever. In a tent at 7,000 meters, nights are not only long, but filled with loneliness and uncertainty. During an open bivouac at 8,000 meters, prolonged darkness arouses emotions that can overwhelm you. Fear, paranoia, even malice. In a word, suffering. Well, how could I not be intrigued by these men and women so intent on the 8,000ers in winter? I wanted to know who they were and why they would subject themselves to this kind of suffering. They are encased in so much protective clothing that they appear more like space travelers, peering out of their goggles and sunglasses. Yet, they have to move like dancers on this steep and difficult terrain, battling the wind and the altitude and the cold. They became known as the Ice Warriors. But there are 14 8,000-meter peaks, and interestingly, the very first one to be climbed in winter was the highest, Everest. Andrzej Zavada was nothing if not ambitious, and as soon as he had perfected the high-altitude strategy with his army of Polish ice warriors, he secured a winter permit for Everest. From 2,400 active climbers in Poland, he put together a short list of 40 of the most experienced, and from that, he chose his team. They arrived in December 1979. And Zavada sent rope teams of climbers up the mountain, pushing the fixed lines and the camps ever higher. And by mid-January, they already had 3 camps established on the mountain. It was incredible, their progress. And he was starting to wonder why nobody had climbed it in winter already. But then the real winter storms hit them, and they were shut down in base camp. Conditions were so miserable that Zavada supplied the climbers with a huge basin into which they poured hot water and climbed in, easing their aching frozen bodies. Progress slowed to a crawl, and climber after climber succumbed to the winter with injuries and exhaustion, frostbite. And at the end, there were just 2 climbers left high in the mountain. Both were relative rookies to this high altitude game. But unfortunately, Zavada had run out of time because their permit expired on February the 15th, and they were only at the South Col. Well, somehow he managed to get a 2-day extension to the permit, and the 2 young ones on the team, Krzysztof Wilicki and Leszek Chihey, left the South Col on the 17th, bound for the summit. Krzysztof later said, "We were in a trance. We already had blinders on. Only the summit mattered. When you feel the nearness of the summit, it's easy to lose your sensitivity. You stop being able to measure your strength versus your ambition. And when you pass a certain boundary, then only luck is left." They reached the summit at 2:25 p.m. on February 17, 1980, and base camp erupted into a frenzy of screaming and shouting. When Krzysztof and Leszek reached base camp a few days later, they were treated as heroes. And Krzysztof later said that such a pure form of joy never happened again on any of his trips to the Himalaya, and he had many, many more trips. So it turned out it was possible. You actually could climb above 8,000 meters in the coldest season. It didn't take long for climbers from other countries to see the potential. And very quickly there were teams from Japan, from the UK, France, South Korea, Italy, Spain, basically all over the world, heading to the Himalaya to attempt first winter ascents. But it was the Polish climbers who dominated. For years, they owned the winter scene. Just 1 year after making that first winter ascent of Everest, Polish climbers did the same on Manaslu with a team from Zakopane, the famous Polish mountain town in the Tatras. This picture is Maciek Berbeka, a young Maciek Berbeka, one of the 2 summit climbers on Manaslu. He became one of the leading winter specialists in the world. Next up was Dalagiri in 1985, when a Polish team, including Jurek Kukuczka, the man in the white sweater, reached the summit. Amazingly, Jurek, who was in a race at that time with the Italian alpinist Reinhold Messner to be the first to climb all 14 of the 8,000 meter peaks, was planning to climb 2 8,000ers in one winter. Well, he actually did it in a tour de force that included multiple nights bivouacking above 7,000 meters and walking to Choyoyou base camp with infected, frostbitten feet. The summit of Choyoyou was reached on February 12, 1985, by our friend from Zakopane, Maciek Berbeka, and his partner, and a couple of days later by Jurek and his partner. Now, this was an incredible climb. It was not only a first winter ascent, but by a new route as well. Andrzej Zavada, who was leader of that team, was on a roll. Well, Jurek was on a roll too, racing Messner for the 8,000 meter prize. And in the winter of 1986, he and Krzysztof Wilicki made the first winter ascent of Kanchenjunga, 3rd highest mountain in the world. This is what they looked like after the expedition. And this is what I saw when I ran into the team in Kathmandu when they returned. Exhausted and despondent because they had lost one of their teammates, Andrzej Chok, on the trip, and they were forced to bury him in a crevasse on the mountain. Next, Jurek put together a small team for Annapurna, and in the winter of 1987, he reached the summit. The team included Wanda Rudkiewicz. She didn't actually make the summit, but Jurek did with his young protege at the time, Arthur Heiser. Another first winter ascent of an 8,000 meter peak, the fourth for Uric in just 3 years. Lhotse in 1988 was the end of Polish winter domination, when Krzysztof Wielicki made not only the first winter ascent, but he did it solo and in a corset because he was suffering from a broken back. I think I mentioned something earlier about Polish climbers knowing something about suffering. Well, it was 17 long years before another 8,000 meter peak was climbed in winter. And shockingly, at least to the Poles, an Italian was involved. The summit of Shishapangma was reached by the Italian climber Simone Moro in 2005. But since his rope partner, Piotr Morawski, was Polish, it was assumed that this was the reason, at least by the Poles. Well, not so. The next 8,000er to be climbed in winter was Makalu in 2009. Again, Simone Moro, but this time with the Russian climber Denis Urubko. Simone next moved his sights to the Karakoram, where 4 8,000 meter peaks were still waiting to be climbed in winter. He and Denis, again, together with American Corey Richards, made the first winter ascent of Gasherbrum 2 in 2011. And on their descent, all three were caught in an avalanche. And Corey's self-portrait, this one, just after he had been partially dug out by Simone, became the face of high-altitude winter climbing. This photo actually helped catapult Corey's career into the stratosphere, but he maintains to this day that the photo is like an albatross around his neck. Well, by now, dozens of people were vying for the few summits still unclimbed in winter. And when Gasherbrum 1 was first climbed in winter, there were 2 teams on the mountain at the same time, an international team and a Polish team. Well, it was the Polish team that made the first ascent, including this young climber, Adam Bilecki. He was soon to make a real name for himself in the winter arena. Sadly, there were a number of casualties on the mountain that season as well, like so many times, including young Austrian alpinist Gerfried Goschel, who is seen here with his family the summer before he died on Gasherbrum 1. Broad Peak was next, and Broad Peak presented one of the most heartbreaking stories about winter climbing that I know of. Back in 1988, when a Polish team was attempting K2 in winter, 2 of the climbers, including Maciek Berbeka, our friend from Zakopane, moved over to Broad Peak, thinking that it seemed to have better weather and maybe would offer a better chance. Well, Maciek ended up making the summit attempt alone and actually thought he had climbed it. But it was stormy, and it turned out he had only reached the rocky summit, just a few meters lower than the main summit. It was a devastating blow to Maciek. 25 years later, in 2013, another Polish team was preparing to go to Broad Peak, which, believe it or not, was still not climbed in winter. Well, I happened to be climbing with Maciek in the Tatras Mountains, and I asked him if he would ever consider going back after what had happened all those years ago. He said, absolutely not. He was busy with his family, he was content, he was happy to climb in the Tatras and the Alps, and he had no need or desire to go back to 8,000 meters in winter. And yet, when I heard the announcement of the Broad Peak winter team a couple of months later, Maciek Berbeka was on it. When they invited him, he couldn't say no, at the age of 59. Well, together with Adam Bilecki, the young Polish climber, and 2 others, Maciek made it to the summit of his dream mountain. But sadly, he disappeared on descent, leaving behind another beautiful family to mourn. He disappeared 25 years to the day of his previous high point on Broad Peak. Well, now there were only two 8,000-meter peaks still unclimbed in winter. One of them was Nanga Parbat, and the race was on, with multiple teams on the mountain every winter, year after year. The first winter ascent actually took place in 2016, but one of the most dramatic stories about climbing 8,000ers in winter took place on that mountain 2 years later, in 2018. A Polish climber, another Polish climber, Tomek Maćkiewicz, was on his 7th attempt of the mountain in winter. Now, Tomek had kind of a troubled background. He had lots of personal problems, he had drug addiction problems, and family issues to deal with. He finally found some solace in his new partner, Anna, and in the mountains. More specifically, Nanga Parbat, and even more specifically, in winter. Well, his climbing partner was a French woman, Elisabeth Revol, who was on her 4th attempt to climb Nanga Parbat in winter. They reached the summit together at 5:15 p.m. on January 25th, 2018. But the real drama took place on the descent. When Elisabeth turned to speak to Tomek on the summit, he admitted that he was almost blind. He couldn't see her. At first, she thought it was snow blindness, but she soon realized that he was suffering from altitude sickness. Then he started losing feeling in his limbs. Night was closing in. She helped him down off the summit and found an ice cave where she could shelter him from the wind. She sat outside that ice cave all night, wondering what on earth to do. They were just below the summit, at close to 8,000 meters. They had no bivouac gear, and Tomek was clearly in trouble. By morning, his limbs were completely frozen, and the only option was a rescue. Tomek knew that he could no longer move, so he asked Elisabeth to descend the mountain on her own and initiate a rescue. Well, what followed was epic, as she had to, first of all, leave her partner and then begin a solo descent of Nanga Parbat in winter, down steep technical terrain, all the while trying to organize a helicopter rescue for Tomek. She reached Camp 3, only to learn that there would be no rescue that day. Another open bivouac on the mountain. Well, I would like to read again from the book describing her descent. This photo is of the Kinshoffer face of Nanga Parbat, which Elisabeth was descending. Now, this isn't her photo, obviously, because you can see other people in the image, but it gives you an idea of what she was descending on her own. As the sun slipped below the horizon, Ellie, her nickname was Ellie, felt the intense cold seeping into her body. After some time, she felt strangely warm, safe, peaceful. Her considerable experience in the mountains saved her from the seduction, that painless surrender to death by hypothermia. She fought the illusion of warmth, but was soon hallucinating. A woman offered her a hot cup of tea for a price. Ellie would need to offer a boot. Slipping in and out of consciousness, she woke to see her boot lying beside her. She had no idea how many hours her foot had been exposed to the cold. All the next day, Ellie waited for the sound of a helicopter, for a message announcing they were on their way, for anything at all. She was now close to panic. Her phone batteries began to die, and night was closing in. She sent a message to her friend Ludovic at 5:28. My battery is failing. I will die if help doesn't arrive. At 6:07 p.m., she sent one last message. Descending. Ellie had endured 2 high-altitude bivouacs, one without her boot on, and was now about to attempt a dangerous solo descent of 70-degree ice in the dark. Her warm mitts were with Tomek. She had only her thin inner gloves. In places where the old fixed lines were buried in the ice and snow, she had to unclip and downclimb slowly and carefully, relying completely on her crampons and axes for balance on the glassy, fragile ice. It had been 60 hours since she sipped a drop of water. Then her headlamp died. Extremely tired, she stopped at times and leaned on her axes, licking bits of snow and ice in an attempt to quench her raging thirst. But not for long, because the wind picked up and she chilled off quickly. The wan light of the moon, peering through the clouds, guided her. Down she went, continuously down, slowly, carefully. At the same time, the word was out there that there was this dramatic situation on Nanga Parbat. A climber was in trouble high on the mountain, and they needed a rescue. Well, as luck would have it, there was a Polish team over on K2 trying to make the first winter ascent. A team of elite, high-altitude climbers, and more importantly, acclimatized climbers, a number of whom actually knew the Kinshasa route on Nanga Parbat. 4 of them managed to get flown from K2 over to Nanga Parbat, where they landed on a small rocky platform just below Camp 1. 2 of the rescuers were Adam Beletsky and Denis Sarupko. And I will read again from the book about what happened next. Sorry. 20 minutes after landing, Adam and Denis began racing up the mountain. At 6:22 p.m., they were at 5,219 meters. At 9 p.m., it was 5,670 meters. At 9:44 p.m., 5,814 meters. Up and up they went to 6,100 meters. Benefiting from the light of the same moon that was illuminating Ellie's descent, they climbed 1,200 meters in 8 hours. Denis explained their extraordinary pace. Adam and me, we were very well trained before the expedition on K2, and of course, we were already acclimatized. It helped us to expend in short time a lot of effort. They both knew the route from previous expeditions, but ascending it at night was another game altogether. They climbed as light as possible, no sleeping bags, only a bit of food, some liquids, a bivy sack, a stove, gas, and spare mitts. Along the way, they broke one of the cardinal rules of mountaineering: no grabbing onto old fixed lines. I also have this rule that I don't climb on old fixed ropes, Adam said. And here I am climbing at night in the same place. I almost lost my life, and the only help is old fixed lines. It's not such a common thing to climb at night. We know how to do it, but we usually don't do it in winter at altitudes above 5,000 meters because it's too cold. But this time, we literally had no choice. Denis reached Ellie shortly before 2 a.m. One moment, I heard him screaming, "Adam, I can hear her, Adam." A moment later, he said, "I've got her, I've got her." Denis brought Ellie over to Adam, who checked condition. She was seriously frostbitten and was unable to manipulate her hands. She couldn't clip and unclip the carabiner. Ellie was traveling even lighter than Adam and Denis. She had no headlamp, no pack, no sleeping pad, and only thin gloves on her frostbitten hands. They moved her to a ledge where they could sit together. They replaced her gloves with warm mitts and then heated some water and gave her drugs to stimulate her circulation. Ellie told them of her lonely descent, of her hallucinations, of having removed her boot for a phantom woman who demanded it in exchange for a warm cup of tea. She told them of Tomac, his frightening state. They spread out the bivouac sack and tried to shield it from the wind, nestling Ellie between them. She put her legs on me and she lay down on Adam's side, Dennis explained. They watched as she slept, and they talked quietly about what to do. Should they take her to a safe spot, secure her to the mountain, and continue up to Tomac? Ellie had explained that Tomac was unable to move. He would need to be carried. We understood that if we left Ellie and continued up for Tomac, she would die, Adam explained. They also knew that the two of them couldn't carry Tomac down, and he was too high for a helicopter. Tomac, they slowly realized, was beyond help. Adam said, "That's a thought that doesn't sink in right away. You have to sit with it a while." Dennis added, "We chose to rescue Elizabeth." Well, the high altitude winter dramas have continued year after year. On Nanga Parbat, Everest, Manaslu, Broad Peak, and now again K2. Second highest mountain in the world, most difficult 8,000ers to climb in any season. 4 teams on the mountain this year, over 60 climbers from 19 countries, overcrowded camps, a spider's web of fixed ropes, hurricane force winds as usual, sub-zero temperatures, unlimited ambition and drive, and wildly varying levels of skill and experience. We all watched and wondered, who would be first? Would it be a Sherpa team? Would it be Tamara Lungar? I think the whole world was thrilled when the team of 10 Nepali climbers made a lightning fast ascent of the mountain on January 16th of this year. What they accomplished in that incredible weather window with very little wind was nothing short of remarkable. And waiting for each other so they could all touch the top together, singing their national anthem, was unbelievable. But that's when the good news ended. On that very day, Catalan climber Sergi Mingotti fell to his death. And when the next weather window opened, a couple of dozen climbers jockeyed for position on the mountain, crowding the camps and the fixed lines. On February 5th, Atanas Skatov fell to his death and was evacuated from the mountain. And then the waiting began for the 3 remaining climbers still making a summit attempt. Icelandic climber John Snorri, Chilean climber Juan Pablo Moore, and Pakistan's most accomplished high-altitude climber Muhammad Ali Sadpara. Well, as I am recording this lecture for you, it is the 8th of February, and the 3 climbers have simply disappeared and are presumed dead on K2. These are just a few of many stories of the ice warriors and their efforts on the highest mountains on Earth in the cruelest season, winter. And I thank you very much for joining me.
Prerna Dangi is a professional climber who's pushing the limits on rock, ice, and everything in between. Based out of Delhi, she works as an outdoor guide and is supported by Mishmi Takin. As an aspiring alpinist, Prerna is constantly working to grow as an all-round climber. She also works with communities and organizations on a number of projects, including fostering a stronger climbing culture in India with an emphasis on getting more women into the sport.
Good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to share my ice climbing escapades at this year's Himalayan Club Winter Seminar. This is my 5th season of ice climbing, and this photo is literally of our last climb of a 2.5-month-long ice climbing season spent entirely in Himachal Pradesh. As a climber, I see ice climbing to be a salient part of winters in the Himalayas. And with these words and photos, I hope that I can do justice to this beautiful and exhilarating winter sport that's now finally picking up in India. A quick intro to my background. I'm based out of New Delhi and I come from Majkhali, a small village in the Kumaon side of Uttarakhand. This slide describes my journey, or more like the transition of my climbing journey. And the first one on the left is from my first ice climb ever at the basic course in the Byaskhund Glacier. And some of you who are Indian Mountaineering Institute alumni might relate to the uniform and everything. And the one on the right is from last month. And the transition between the two took almost a decade. I started climbing 10 years ago, so I'm 28 now, not as young as many people might think. And I've been involved in the outdoors professionally for the past 5 years, and I work as a mountain guide. I teach people rock climbing, and I also teach people ice climbing. Ice climbing is a new sport in India, and I'd like to start off by defining it. So ice climbing is the act of ascending inclined, vertical, or overhanging ice formations, such as ice falls, frozen waterfalls, rock slabs covered with ice, as seen here. What's important here is that the ice we climb comes from a flowing source of water that freezes and is therefore considered newer ice as opposed to glacial ice, which is snow that's consolidated over the years to become hard ice. This is also known as Alpine Ice, and the only reason we don't go in there is because in winters it is obviously much harder and sometimes impractical to go to glaciers looking for ice to climb due to the lengthy approach and extreme conditions. So water ice being more accessible becomes a great way to not only train for the mountains, but also as a pursuit in itself. Talking about conditions, temperature plays a huge role in defining the quality and slope of ice, which are the most important parameters that we have to consider before climbing anything, apart from the weather and avalanche risk. We essentially look for structures that look solid, which means the ice is thick, blue, and free of natural hazards. The icefall on the right here, which is more like a waterfall actually, is just flooding due to an overflow in the water channel that forms it. So changing temperatures through the day also affect the ice and need to be kept in mind. Finally, ice climbing needs technical tools, which are, sorry, I'm trying to get back to my previous slide right here. I'm not being able to do that anyway. Finally, ice climbing needs gear, technical tools, which are crampons that attach to the boots to secure your foot placements, and ice tools, which are also called ice axes, that secure the hand placements. In the movement of ice climbing, We essentially swing our tools and kick the crampons into the ice to move up on inclines that can range from 60 degrees all the way up to overhanging curtains of ice. Needless to say, finding the right equipment to ice climb is a challenge in India at the moment. It's a gap that we're trying to meet. Ice climbing started in Europe in the 19th century as an offshoot of mountaineering. And with the invention of technical gear, it has picked up as a discipline. It picked up as a discipline of its own. It also seemed to perfectly fit the climber's mentality to find the hardest way up a vertical face. So people started looking for steeper ice closer to home. Brave is the word that was used to describe ice climbers back in the day, since they made some of the most bold ascents using minimal equipment. And brave is what you have to be to lead ice due to the high consequences attached to the sport. Back in the day, it was death. If you fell on ice, the kind of ice that was being led, you would most likely die or get severely injured. Of course, now it is a much safer sport, but the pursuit is still considered a bit on the crazy side. Here's something about ice climbing that no one will tell you until you're out on your first day of ice. It's type 2 fun, which means that it's miserable while it's happening, but fun in retrospect. Due to the extreme nature of the environment that sustains good ice, the entire experience involves pushing of limits. It's cold, you don't feel thirsty, but you're parched. You have to pee ever so frequently over all of the layers that you're wearing, but this is the soft stuff. The climbing, especially when it's dead vertical, can give you a pump that feels like it will never go away. And in that moment, you have to keep in mind the 3 rules of ice climbing. Don't fall, don't die. Because of all of the sharp equipment that we are attached to while climbing, it is highly dangerous to take a fall of any manner. And that's why, as ice climbers, we try and reduce the chance of even arriving to a point where we may fall. So there is a lot of planning that goes into each movement, and that starts way before one is actually on the wall to climb ice. Fortunately for us, India has a lot of ice, and with more explorations and growing awareness about the sport, ice climbing is gaining popularity amongst outdoor enthusiasts. In the last 5 years, India is witnessing the rise of ice climbing. Various events and exploratory trips are taking place across the Himalayan states, including Pahalgam in Jammu and Kashmir, Lahaul Spiti valleys of Himachal Pradesh, even lower valleys such as Solang and Nubra Valley that divides the Karakoram and Ladakh ranges, as well as parts of Gangtok in the northeastern Himalayas. Which so far that what has been identified is only the tip of the iceberg, as there are still very few independent ice climbers or skilled climbers who are working to tap the potential of this mighty playground. This stunning fall in the Nubra Valley on the left is called Luxury, 40 meters of just beautiful ice, and this one on the right is like a 2-hour walk into the Kaza Nala, and it's this pitch, which looks like a shivling that I'm climbing, is literally the end of that Nala, and it emerges into an opening in the canyon, a mesmerizing place to be in. So my focus would be on Spiti, as this is where it all began for us, where it all began for me. And to give you a brief about the conditions here, winter embraces Spiti in the first week of November and stays on until the 4th week of March. It's cold, It's harsh and it's a tough time in the high altitude valley that touches 4,000 meters. Temperatures can be easily seen going below 20 degrees centigrades. And the Spiti River is the only water body that continues flowing as everything else essentially freezes. One would think ideal conditions, and that's what we did too. But we were going to find out just how ideal. We landed in Spiti on our first ice climbing trip in February 2015. I, along with Karan Kaushik and Bharat Bhushan, rode from Delhi in Karan's Duster, and I mentioned the car just to warn anyone from using it to go to Spiti, especially in winter. Karan, who had spent many summers in Spiti, was certain that we would find frozen waterfalls to climb. And he had just been to the US. He had managed to climb some ice in the season, and he wanted to share it with us. We'd met, the three of us met at Climbathon, and we were the three misfits. We found each other, and then we started climbing together. That's how I think you find climbing partners in this world. And we had the intention, but we had very little experience, very little gear, and a lot of snow that particular year. So out of the 8 days of the trip, we climbed for maybe 1.5 days, and the rest of the time was spent in getting there, getting the puncture fixed, getting the car to start, trying to get there and not reaching because there was too much snow. Climbing one day, scouting the place on the first day, and then coming back to climb, or figuring out how to climb on the second day. Having an avalanche come over us, a mini avalanche caused by an ibex somewhere over here. And this is the Shilla waterfall, the first waterfall that we went to. We essentially asked the locals if they knew of a fall that freezes, Jamma Wanala. That's what we were looking for, and everybody pointed us to this direction. And when we came here, we really knew not exactly what we were doing. And the entire experience of not actually being able to climb much, that was a first great lesson from Spiti. And we knew that we had to come back with more time and more and a stronger intention, and definitely more gear. Because on this trip, Bharat and I were sharing our boots, since we only had one pair between the two of us, and we only had one pair of technical ice axes. And it was really a collective effort where all of us, whatever we knew, we were trying to apply it on this top rope section. I don't even remember that any of us could lead it. We went up this easy ramp, set up a top rope somewhere here, and then we were climbing over here. And the avalanche that was caused by the ibex, Bharat was under that avalanche. When he was on the top rope, I was belaying him, and it was, I think for the both of us, it was our first avalanche. So we did what people do, and I completely fled the scene. I was holding on to my braking hand on the belay, but I ran away from my belay spot as far as I could. Luckily, it was a small one, and there was not a lot of debris in it, so everything was okay. But this is a story that we fondly remember from our 1.5 day of ice climbing. So a lot of our time was spent hanging, and we didn't exactly know what to do. And that's how you kind of start. And because of this reason, it became meaningful that we do it regardless of the fact that we don't exactly know what we're doing. In a way, that was our bold moment. And this may not look like a typical pioneering ice climbing photo, but this was the beginning of ice climbing in India, as far as we know it. And from 3 people, we kept growing our tribe to more and more climbers who were bold enough to lead, and that community continues to grow with each winter. Following up at the end of that same year, I got the perfect opportunity to partake in the youth ice climbing training program in Russia. I don't remember being a youth even at that point, but somehow it worked out. It was in a town called Kirov, 1,500 kilometers northwest of Moscow. Even though I knew that I was not going to compete in ice climbing, I'd been bitten by the ice bug, and I was ready to do anything to learn more about this movement. And I was super curious to understand how it is actually done. So even if not for medals, I went to this program just to get a sense of the movement, to learn how to swing an ice axe the right way. And I definitely came back with a renewed understanding of the movement required for ice, and carried that forward in my experience. The same winter, early 2016, I found myself in Scotland attending the winter climbing meet, and that's organized by the British Mountaineering Club. It was strange to put so much effort on to climb a hill that was 1,500 meters high in the Kaivan range, but this is where I truly experienced, the uniqueness of climbing in winters, and it. I think it was here where my understanding of how and why I want to climb began to change more and more. And I started emphasizing more on the nature of climbing rather than what I was climbing. So, whatever it was that I had to climb, I wanted to climb it in a certain way, from a certain route. So these experiences helped me gain self-awareness of the cold environment, understanding conditions, and mostly keeping my head together when the screaming barfies hit me, and all I want to do is curl up in a fetal position and cry. I also got to dry tool in a quarry, and thanks to the weather of UK, it was too warm for it to snow, so it was raining heavily in the dead of winter. And it was a very unique experience where I learned to develop. I learned actually that I had a long way to develop the strength required for something as steep as this, and that even in my attempt to do so, it would help me, it would benefit me when I did go on ice, which was my ultimate goal. I've missed another one of my slides. So this is me looking at one of my biggest, I would say, ice climbing achievements, or a route that I'm super proud of. After my experiences outside abroad, I came back to climb ice in Spiti in 2018. And it was also to shoot a segment for a movie called Project Wild Women under the Inspire crew, where they wanted to show Indian women that were involved in extreme and alternate sports. And I was the ice climber in that movie. I think there was maybe some sort of a pressure that instilled in me in the sense of confidence, and that worked well for me because I went in. Bharat was there, and he'd been scouting lines all through November before the ice season actually starts. And he said, "Oh, I have a line for you. You're leading well, and come, let's go climb this pitch. It's under the Dankar Monastery, and here you can see the Dankar Monastery right at the top over here, and the sea pitch is the Dankar Monastery Fall, essentially." 3 pitches of extremely steep ice. I had no idea what I was. Okay, I had some idea what I was getting into, and I got there and I started leading. It was extremely fluting ice, very difficult to protect, and I remember being mid-pitch thinking, maybe if I fall from here, I will break a bone, and I'm okay with that. Uh, and so we continued climbing. And when I look back now to that lead, which was my third lead ever, uh, I still don't know how I did it, but I'm very proud of it. Here's a topo of the fall that we did. In 2020, I came back. I've been climbing that fall every year that I've gone to Spiti, 2019, 18, 20. And my last climb over there was with Susie, my friend who's a German guide. And we've kind of explained here that the fall is 180 meters. It's graded HWI 6 plus, and 3 pitches, the third one being chandeliered, very steep. The second pitch, which had 35 meters of extremely steep ice, and the first pitch, which is the monster pitch, and I still get nightmares about it. I was very happy on this particular climb because I got to follow somebody for a change, and that was my highlight. And also climbing with a fellow ice climbing woman, a woman who was also an ice climber. I think that was a new thing for me. Uh, so Dankar Monastery was the hardest climb that had been done until 2019 when Snow Leopard, which is located outside the village of Morang, was climbed by the American duo of Karsten Delap and Ari Novak. It's just such a stunning line when you look at it. It's it's also heavily chandeliered. There are pillars that are overhanging, and some of them that are freestanding. You don't know what part is attached to the ground or not. It got its name from the cat tracks that the team encountered at the base of this frozen waterfall, and it's located at a height of 4,260 meters approximately. Here's another one. One of the prominent lines on the Lingti waterfall, and Lingti is one of our main areas where we take a lot of beginners to teach them as well. It's visible from the road. You can see that there is a bridge right here, and we've named this route Matinee Show because throughout the day we had a lot of people who stopped short on their tracks and got out of the car to see what are these punters doing, why the hell are they climbing ice. In order to look for ice, we would start walking into a gorge or a nala, and every time you would find spectacular ice to climb. So this is from a 2-hour approach walk into the end of the Key Nala near Key Monastery. It's quite popular amongst, if you've gone to Spiti, then you would know Key Monastery. And these places feel extremely surreal. We're all alone there. Locals have no reason to go there, especially during winters. And all we heard from the locals were stories of monks who would go and meditate in the caves hidden in these nalas. And that was a very special thing. I think all of these places, because they have such a high reverence for the mountains and the gods that reside within them. There is an energy that you feel when you go to these places. Close to Kaza, we came across this huge basin of sorts right by the Rongthong village, and we started calling it the Rongthong Park because we began thinking of the possibility of making a man-made icefall, which is formed by water dripping from pipes. It's a very common phenomena in the US, and a lot of the water ice parks over there are made this way. So far in India, it has been attempted in Ladakh in the Ganglis region by the Ladakh Mountain Guide Association people. There's, if it can work out, I think there's a huge future in man-made ice constructions and formations in India as well. Maybe the next step. I'm going to quickly share a little bit about ice climbing grading, as you may have become curious about the HWI next to the names of the waterfalls. So the system is highly variable by region and is still evolving. Universally, WI stands, it's an acronym for water ice, alongside the numeric grade that is given. Ice grades go from water ice 2, which signifies a 60-degree slope at least, with with very good protection, and goes all the way to water ice 7, which is considered extremely sustained, overhanging, unprotectable ice. Basically test pieces. There's very few of them that exist. Some of them, if you do it, it automatically becomes a water ice 6 plus. But essentially, grading is based on the slope, how easy it is to protect that ice, and the quality of the ice. Himalayan water ice stands for HWI stands for Himalayan water ice. It is a locally established ice climbing grading system, and it was first used by the three of us, Karan, Bharat, and I, as we established several first ascents in Spiti Valley. It was developed in the comparative absence of enough water ice routes to compare to, and the added factor of altitude that plays a pivotal role in climbing around Spiti. As we climbed more and more, we realized that we had to pass on what we were learning, and so came the idea to start an ice climbing festival that was christened Pitidhar. And Piti, to break down the name for you, Spiti was originally pronounced as Piti, which translates to middle land, as it is a middle land between Tibet and India. And Dhar is ice in local Spitian. So thus came about the idea to start this festival. And the idea was to promote the sport of climbing. We couldn't grow the community if we were just climbing amongst ourselves. We wanted to share whatever we had learned, and while preserving the space that we call our playground and involving the local community who opened their homes for us. So we really wanted to provide a grounding in the technical discipline of ice climbing, and it could only start if climbers were aware of the opportunities around them and had the ability to pursue them. So we felt that we could create a platform where this was enabled. And we also felt that this kind of specific training could give Indian climbers the confidence to open technical routes and attempt new lines in the Himalayas. The photo is from 2020. A very important part of the festival is to nurture local young talent from within the valley. By exposing the local Spiti kids to ice climbing, we came up with a mentorship program and facilitated their training, provided them gear and other facilities for free of cost throughout this period when the festival ran. And then, of course, the festival also gives an opportunity for sustainable tourism for the people of Spiti during the lean winter months where they otherwise don't have anything to rely on. Talking about the obstacles in ice climbing, we ran into a couple of them, and we figured a system where we could foresee them every time. To begin with, the cars would never start in the morning, and if there's one car that would, it was the gypsy. So in this photo, you can see there's somebody who's boiled uh, diesel and petrol, sorry, and they're putting it in the tank. And yeah, no antifreeze would work. We saw some of the best cars just lay still and not being able to start because of how cold it actually was. Ice climbing is obviously only possible where the valleys are accessible in winters by road, but still that does not guarantee that you will climb ice because every day, if there was too much snow and we were too far away from where the JCB was last seen, then there was a high chance that the snow conditions would not be ideal to even take the gypsy out on with or without chains on the tires. So we would have to wait for the JCB to come and clear the roads out, or another vehicle to be bold enough to open the route. Walking to the crag, we were always we'd have to be careful about the snow accumulation because that may lead to avalanche risks. So there were some crags that are right by the road and that are avalanche free, which is what we would usually go to if in case there was snow. And otherwise, we would avoid the crags that were far away. And usually the approach would involve a 45 to 2 hour walk into the nalas or into a new valley along the riverbed most of the times. So on some days, hazards would look like this. Yeah, one of our participants stepped on weak ice and that gave way. And so he went waist deep into the stream, which was fortunately very shallow. While this was, a risk that got managed, but the fellow on the left came running to rescue his friend and went inside the water as well. And a part of our course is, teaching people about managing risks, something that we in the course do for them. And, it's very important to impart that knowledge to people because that is what is required to be able to go out self-sufficiently. It is the decision making, and this is a hard way of learning an important lesson. But we encourage people to always, foresee the risks that they may be taking when they're going out ice climbing in a very cold environment. Water, of course, if everything's freezing, how is the water running? So the locals work extremely hard to ensure that their water sources remain unfrozen. And it's obviously very difficult insulation, despite insulation, or if the temperature drops to the extreme that the pipes get blocked sometimes. But because it is such a common phenomena, everyone keeps some water for buffer. But still, it is a struggle every day to sustain yourself in the limited amount of water that you get. Here's a photo of Sonam, who is part of the Pitidhar team, who traded his backpack in the second half of the day for a can of water because that's what he had to do. And he's from Marne village, and we'd gone there to spend a couple of days and to find some ice, and we found some amazing ice. And but I think it's moments like these where one realizes that there is more to uh, life than just climbing ice, because that's what sometimes we, as people who are privileged to engage in these sports recreationally, we seem to forget things like this. So I find this image very special. And Sonam still climbs with us, and he's learning with us. He wants to be able to teach people, and what binds us is that he loves the outdoors as much as we do. And I think that's what climbing is really about. No amount of ice climbing would have been possible in Spiti if it had not been for this one man sitting inside the room that is sitting both serving food as usual. The owner of the Sakya abode, the only homestay that opened their doors for us in the first winter that we went. And he has literally seen the community grow from 3 people to so many more. And each year we bring more and more people. And this guy is the one who enables us to do that. It would just not be possible to sustain oneself in such extreme and harsh environment, and to do something as extreme as ice climbing if you weren't getting, a warm bed to sleep in and warm food to eat. So I just have to put this out there that we can't camp in Gaza. We can't stay in tents. And if it wasn't for this person's house, for Siring's house, then I'm not sure what we would be doing. I also had to dedicate a slide to this bed because electric blankets is what we got at Sakya aboard, and that changed the game for everybody, because sleeping in -20 is, after a hard day of climbing, is not easy. And it's because of this level of comfort, every single day we were able to push ourselves to the extreme, because that is what we were doing when we were out there. Global warming. Uh, each year we're seeing that the conditions are getting warmer, and things are melting much faster. There's fluctuation in the weather, in the temperatures every single day, and we don't expect, but a lot of the ice that we climb keeps melting sooner, and we're not able to return to it as much as we could. Uh, and that is definitely a cause of concern. On this particular day, this second water channel flooded unexpectedly, and the water level of the ground kept going higher. So we were standing on a sheet of ice, and that became submerged underwater. So we had to evacuate people out of this climbing area. Lately, and obviously due to COVID, this year Spiti was not accessible at all. So our team, Bharat, Anil Benwal, and I, we decided to go to Lahore and seek out ice climbing adventures over there. And we were not, this place met our overseeded our expectations. We managed to open 20 plus routes in just one area, and the opportunity is absolutely endless. This is one of the most beautiful walls out there. It's called Sabertooth, and there's 4 climbers on the wall right now. Definitely one of the 5-star lines in this area. Here's a beautiful photo captured by a friend of us climbing in the night, and the very concept of climbing under the stars was, it's unreal. It's very difficult to explain, and to have the waterfall get illuminated by a torchlight, and to just become so tuned in to the noise, the little sounds that the ice created under our crampons. I wish I could make you hear that, but maybe that will be for next time. Whiskey Shadow of Murgi. So while my team was stuck in Spiti and Lahore, while my team stuck to Spiti and Lahore for our adventures, Karn, being the visionary that he is, saw that there was potential in Ladakh, and alongside Sewang Namgyal and Rigzin, he has been spending this was his second winter. It was their second winter in Nubra Valley, and they managed to open I think around 20 plus lines in this season in the eastern Karakoram range. And it's just amazing how the ice is so different. It's much thinner and it's stuck to the rock so well. This is Sewang climbing his second season of leading ice, and he's obviously fearless. It's a 140-meter route. So the difference in Ladakh and Spiti maybe was that the routes were much taller in Ladakh. Another gorgeous line called Marshigan, and the ice looks very scanty. In fact, I don't know if this was very fun to climb, because sketchy ice is never fun to climb. But the expanse of this valley, it's amazing, and this is not very far from the Siachen base camp. To end with, I am going to leave you with this image of the rarest of the rare big cats of the Indian Himalayas, the snow leopard, also known as Chan in Ladakhi. And I wasn't fortunate enough to see it, but our friends in Ladakh got more than a glimpse of this beautiful creature. And I think looking at this photo makes me realize that the more we seek out, the more sensitive a zone we are going into, and that calls upon for more responsibility and accountability on us to take care of these places that we are going in. And really, the idea, we've only just started ice climbing, and it would be really sad that the ice climbing season starts becoming shorter or basically vanishes. If anybody has ideas on how to stop that from happening, I am listening, and I'm here to do something to change that. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and if you ever want to ice climb, please message me. Thank you so much.
Mark Ritchie began rock climbing in 1973 at the age of 15 in the Quincy Quarries of Massachusetts. Adept at all forms of climbing, he has made over 30 expeditions to the greater ranges of the world with a focus towards technical alpine-style ascents and exploratory climbing. Mark's expeditions have taken him from the remote fjords in Greenland to desert rock towers in Ethiopia and some of the least visited mountain ranges of Nepal, Peru, Tibet, India, and Pakistan. Steve Swenson has been climbing for over half a century. His ascents include K2 and Everest without supplementary oxygen, and the first ascent of Sasir Kangri 2 in 2011 with Mark Ritchie and Freddie Wilkinson. The trio were awarded the Piolet d'Or in 2012 for this ascent. Steve's book, Karakoram, Climbing Through the Kashmir Conflict, won the Keku Nauroji Book Award for Himalayan Literature in 2019. This past summer, Mark, Steve, Graham Zimmerman, and Chris Wright summited the 7,041-meter Link Sar in Pakistan, a mountain which had repelled numerous attempts for over 40 years. Today, Mark, Steve, and their partners will tell us about their climb on Link Sar.
Hi folks, Nick Smith here, speaking to you from London. Welcome to number 16 in our series of Alpine Club casts. We're headed across the Atlantic for an evening with the American Alpine Club. I really hope you enjoy it.
I'm from Plum Island, Massachusetts. I'm in New Hampshire right now for this club cast, but I've been climbing for a long time, past president of the American Alpine Club, and really looking forward to sharing our story with everyone. And I'll turn it over to my longtime friend and partner, Steve Swenson.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Swenson. I'm here in Seattle right now, and beautiful day, and let's get into the program. I'm going to start off, as was mentioned, Link Sar is a really complicated mountain. It's in this Google Earth photo, you can see that the bulk of the mountain, the east side of the mountain, faces down into the Kiberi Glacier. There's a small part of the mountain on the left side that faces into the Charakusa Glacier. One of the main problems with trying to climb this peak over the last several decades is that it's in an area that's contested between India and Pakistan. And after the Siachen conflict that many of you probably know about, or you can do some research on, in 1984, this whole area was closed. And the Kiberi Glacier and the Kondus Valley, once you go back there still, I didn't mean to wave, Graham. The Kiberi Glacier and the Kondus Valley is where the bulk of the mountain faces into, and that area, that glacier has been closed for the most part ever since the Siachen conflict in '84. Okay. In 2000, I went to a slideshow that Jimmy Chin was giving because the brigadier general who was in charge of that region, General Tahir, was very sympathetic to climbers, and the area opened very briefly. In 2000, Jimmy and Brady and who else was involved? Steph Davis and Dave Anderson, Brady Robinson, did a big wall on this tower called Tahir Tower that we have a picture of a little bit later. But then Jimmy showed me this picture of Link Sar, this unclimbed 7,000 meter peak. So I applied for it right away, and we got permission for Link Sar in my first attempt on it in 2001. We just found out recently there was a 1964 attempt by some Germans on Link Sar, which is kind of surprising because during that period of time, most of the Karakoram was closed, and we don't have a lot of information on where they went. But in the early 70s, a Japanese expedition climbed up that grassy ramp left of the Link Sar Glacier and along the left side of the Link Sar Glacier, then crossed underneath all those ice cliffs and seracs below the summit to try to climb up some ramps on the face to reach the right-hand skyline and try to get up to the summit that way. But they only made it partway up those ramps and came down. In 2001, our original idea was we would follow the Japanese route. And as you might notice in this photo, there's a buttress that sticks down and out that's shading a rock wall to the left of it. And there's a couloir behind there that we thought, oh, we can climb up that couloir to the summit that way. But when we got up to that point where we could see up into the couloir, it's full of seracs and dangerous things that can fall on you. So we abandoned that, and we went back down to base camp and kind of reassessed and decided that a very complicated interwoven route of weaving back and forth around different obstacles on the east face was probably the way to go. And we made it to about maybe 5,000, 5,500 meters on Link Sar in 2001 before we had to leave. After I left Link Sar in 2001, I went to Hushe, which is a village where Rasul, who's on the right there, has been longtime cook, guide, partner, friend, brother to me, and hung out with his family. And then his son, Fida Ali, who's about 6, 8 years old in this picture, will actually come to play a role in this story about 20 years later. So I wanted to come back to Link Sar to finish what we'd started, but after 2001, that whole General Tahir moved on to a different posting, and the new brigadier wasn't friendly towards climbers, and I applied, 4 or 5 times to go back to Link Sar until finally my Pakistani friend said, "Steve, you should stop applying because they'll think you're a spy, that, they don't really understand that you're just a climber that wants to go in and climb unclimbed peaks. They'll think that you, for some reason, you want to get into this high security zone for other reasons, and so you should stop applying." And so I did, and for a number of years, we were going to other places in the Karakoram to the Laytok peaks, or we went to the Mazino Ridge on Nanga Parbat. Then Mark and I did a couple of trips into the Eastern Karakoram in India, and then one of the trips while we were doing these other climbs, waiting for Link Sar, is always in the back of my mind to try to go there as soon as it opened up again. A number of attempts were made on Link Sar from the Charcusa Valley by John Griffith and various different partners, and they were trying to climb up that glacier on the left side of the photo and up that face, and then you can see there's a very long exposed and committing ridge from there over to the summit of Link Sar. And they made it up onto that ridge at least once, but were unable to do the traverse over to the summit tower. And I believe John went on expeditions there in 2012, 13, 14, and 15. In 2015, I went on another trip to Pakistan with Graham. This was my first trip to Pakistan with Graham, and Graham and I were there with Scott Bennett. And our objective was the south face of K6 Central. K6 Central is a 7,000 meter peak that hasn't been climbed yet. And the photos we had of it only showed maybe the upper third, upper half, where we could see there was this buttress coming down from the summit that we thought would provide some protection from those seracs on either side. But when we went over a col between the Nongma Valley and the Lashit Valley, we could see that this buttress only went maybe 2/3 of the way down the face, and the seracs on either side that would calve, the avalanches, as you can see in this photo, would completely obliterate the lower slopes that you would have to climb up to get onto that buttress where you would be safe. And so because of that objective hazard there, we abandoned our plan to try to climb this, and we went ahead with our other objective, which was Changi Tower, which is just across the way from the south face of K6 Central. Changi Tower is a 6,500 meter granite tower, very much like a Trango Tower, but it was hidden back behind other peaks, and you couldn't really see it very well from the Nongma Valley, and the Lashit Valley, the lower Lashit Valley, was closed, so not a lot of people knew about it. We went over there and managed to do the first ascent of Changi Tower in 2015. But the reason why this story about Changi Tower is relevant here, talking about Link Sar, is that from the Kondus Valley, you can see the relationship between Changi Tower and Link Sar. We climbed Changi Tower from the other side, but from the summit of Changi Tower, we had another good look at Link Sar, and it really got me excited about trying to finish that old thing that I'd started almost 20 years, 15 years before at that time. The view from Changi Tower is where this photo was taken, and you can see that long ridge that goes along from the Charakusa Valley over to the summit tower. And you can see why I think where John Griffith and his partner got to was that point, that leftmost point on that ridgeline that they called Link Sar West. And you can still see that there's a lot of difficulty between what they called Link Sar West and the summit with towers and a very committing ridge at almost 7,000 meters. And this totally convinced me, looking at Link Sar, from Changi Tower, that really to climb the peak, you needed to do it from the Condas Valley. And so we had to wait until we could get permission. In 2017, late 2016, early 2017, I started hearing rumors that the Pakistanis had opened the Lashit Valley. Well, they'd opened the Lashit Valley the year before, and that the Condas was opening in 2017. So Graham, who I'd been with on Changi Tower, and I applied. And you can see in this photo right above the Jeep on the right, that big wall, that's Tahir Tower that, Brady and Dave and Steph and Jimmy climbed in 2000. And so we applied and got permission in 2017. Graham invited Chris Wright to be the third member of our party in 2017. And Graham, I think you're going to take it from here.
This photo right here really demonstrates to me why climbing in the Pakistani Karakoram is the best climbing that we have for modern alpinism on the planet. We have amazing rock. We have a fairly dry range, so snow is less of an issue. And we have this amazing adventure in which we can engage. And it's really, for me, that's really, that really kind of encapsulates everything I'm looking for in climbing. And I kind of, before I jump into the story of the 2017 trip, it's really fun to be here presenting to the Alpine Club, because the Mount Everest Foundation and the Alpine Club have been very supportive of my climbing that I've been doing since, I think, back to 2008. And so you wouldn't know it from my accent, but I'm actually originally from down in New Zealand, and so working alongside the New Zealand Alpine Club, and therefore being able to apply for money from the Mount Everest Foundation, which has afforded me opportunities to go to parts of Kyrgyzstan, on a bunch of trips to Alaska, and then on a lot of trips to Pakistan as well. And Pakistan has always been where I've wanted to do, where I've really wanted to climb. And so when I had the opportunity to go with Steve, it was a really big deal. And then when he brought up this objective Link Sar that we had seen from Changi Tower, it was very, very exciting. And so in 2017, we got permission to go, and we brought along Chris Wright, who's a dear friend of mine, IFMGA mountain guide, and he and I had been on a few trips, primarily to Alaska together, and had gotten some pretty sweet things done. And here's a picture of Link Sar that year. So as Steve alluded to earlier during their 2001 trip, just reaching the upper mountain is a big challenge on Link Sar. This is walking across the lower glacier. This is walking through some meadows on the upper approach. This is kind of around where we ended up setting up an advanced base camp. And then this is looking down from where we set up an advanced base camp. And I think this is a really cool image to share kind of why we didn't really use the traditional methodology in kind of modern alpinism, where we would acclimatize on something easy and then go and climb the kind of main event. And the reason we didn't was because this valley, the Condas Valley, is one of the deepest as well as one of the steepest valleys in the Karakoram, and probably in the world. But there aren't really any available easy objectives to reach a height of around 6,000 meters, which is where we needed to get to in order to be acclimatized to go to 7. So what we ended up needing to do was just go start climbing on Link Sar in order to acclimatize. And additionally, these lower sections of Link Sar offered some very challenging route finding. And so we spent, after establishing this kind of advanced base camp, which was just a couple of tents up on this meadow, it took us about 3 weeks of looking at different routes and climbing different ways to try to find our way onto the upper mountain. And eventually, what actually ended up working out was following the Ibex tracks, and that really took us to a kind of hidden hanging glacier that we were able to utilize to reach the upper mountain. And I put this slide in just because this really shows you how stunning the Karakoram is. This place is unreal. And so eventually we reached 6,000 meters, and that had required some very technical climbing, some very good climbing. And at this point we were acclimatized. We kind of knew how to get onto the upper mountain, and we went back to base camp to wait for good weather so that we could go and launch on the upper mountain and get this thing done. At that point, the climbing really ended up, at that point, the weather got quite awful, and we dealt with weeks and weeks of storms. You can see we went bouldering, but generally speaking, we sat in base camp and just waited. And at the very end of the trip, we did get a small forecast for good weather, and Chris and I went up to see if we could just move up there really quickly and get it done. But this is what the climbing looked like. It was really not good, and we ended up retreating from well below our former high point, actually right around what ended up being the crux of the route, and we went home. But then we decided that we wanted to return, and now I'm going to pass it off to Chris.
Yeah, so when we finished our 2017 trip, we knew that we wanted to go back, and we decided that we would, for a lot of personal reasons, financial reasons, etc., take a year hiatus. And of course, we were a little nervous that another team might go try to climb the mountain in 2018, which didn't come to pass. We were really thankful for that, because when we went back in 2019, we felt like we had answered a lot of the questions that we were wondering about on the first trip. And we went back with a few key strategies in mind. The first was that we decided we were going to bring along Mark. He couldn't come with us in 2017, though we wanted him to. We kind of thought a 4-man team would just have more manpower, and with Mark's partnership with Steve, it was great to have another kind of trusted friend and strong climber along. And we also knew that we weren't going to be able to find another peak to acclimatize on. So we had focused already on directing our energies towards going up as far as we could on Link Sar to acclimatize, which meant that we were poised to set up a more robust base camp or advanced base camp rather, up in those grassy meadows closer to the mountain, so that we could cut out a few thousand feet of effort and a few hours of effort to get from our base camp, which was sort of uncomfortable and low and dusty, up to an advanced camp in a much more pleasant spot. And so when we got there in 2019, we were a little disappointed to find that the mountain was really, really, really snowy. All of our local friends told us it had been one of the snowiest winters anybody could remember, and all of those beautiful grassy meadows that we had promised Mark were in fact covered in meters of snow. And you can see here on a recon, Steve pointing out the cairn that had marked our camp in the grasses in 2017, and here you can see how impressed Mark is with the snowy meadows, or sorry, grassy meadows rather. So as soon as we got there, we had a set of challenges to face that we sort of hadn't seen coming. and trying to establish base or advanced base camp in those grassy meadows took quite a long time because we had to wait for the snows to melt both in that camp location and on the upper mountain. But we also had to get all of our supplies up that lower part of the mountain that you can see there. And that was no mean feat either, because in 2017, we had carried all of our supplies ourselves and had a fairly meager camp. This time we decided to enlist the help of porters and spent ages kind of constructing a network of fixed lines and ropes that we decided to call our via ferrata to help our porters safely get up there. And then once we did get all of our things up to that camp, we had to start digging and sort of constructing this little town out of mud and rocks. And we actually took a full month to even get set up there. So we had 8 weeks for the trip, and it was July 4th, the first night that we spent up there at camp. But eventually it did melt out, and we were able to set up a fairly comfortable camp at around 4,500 meters, something like that. And from there, we were able to attack the upper mountain for some acclimatization missions. And we did that knowing that the climbing to get from our advanced base camp to a camp below the main face was going to be relatively easy. We still had to wait quite a long time for the snows to settle. There were multiple avalanche events that left us feeling like we just needed more time, and we were just watching the clock tick. But eventually we were able to get into position below the buttress that we climbed in 2017. And we're able to set off for an acclimatization mission, climbing through that buttress in much better conditions than we'd had previously. It was still really warm despite all the snow, so we were climbing predominantly at night while that lower section was frozen. And as a team, we were able to reach our high point previously at about 6,000 meters, where we had a beautiful camp. This is a photo from 2017 of Steve at that camp. And from there, we spent 2 nights. We poked around a little bit to see how things were going to look above, and then we returned down to advanced base camp, where we could wait for the weather that we needed for our shot at the summit. It took a long time. It took a lot of waiting. It took a lot of patience, but eventually we did get the weather that we needed. So we headed back up now with only a few weeks left in the trip, after just weeks of rain and sitting around being nervous, just staring up at the mountain. So it was very exciting when we finally climbed above our 6,000 meter camp and could begin to answer the questions that we didn't already know the answers to, which turned out in retrospect to actually be quite a lot of them. We really thought we had the thing sussed and were quite chuffed with ourselves, and turns out we were completely wrong about that because there's still quite a lot of mountain above us. But principally, we were worried about how to get around those ice cliffs above me in this photo here. And so we were delighted to find a pretty simple bridge that once we climbed up on top of those, we could get over onto kind of the main mountain proper and establish a camp up at around 6,300 meters, which was a really key camp for us because we had a forecast that told us we were going to have a bit of good weather, then a bit of bad weather, and then some good weather. So we didn't have the 9 days that ideally we wanted to get up the mountain and down safely. So knowing we might not get that, we decided to climb into the storm, set up a camp which proved to be perfect and safe, and wait out the bad weather. And so we sat at that camp for for a full 48 hours, I believe, before the good weather was supposed to come. And then we launched out in the middle of the night. Well, this is right at the beginning of where the good weather was supposed to be. And in order to wait for the perfect weather to come, we ended up in the middle of the night digging a snow cave to sit in for about an hour after about 3 hours of digging, and waited for the weather to get better. Our spirits improved, as did the weather, and we were able to climb higher. Did some brilliant climbing that day on some really kind of classic pitches that I think would have been welcome on any day out. And then eventually that gave way to the snows, and we began sort of slogging through deep snows, kind of trenching our way up the mountain. But you know, this day we're between Bivy 3 and 4, so we knew we were getting close to the summit. We were able to find a really lovely bivouac up at just about 6,700 meters below the summit, and you can see Steve here looking up from camp at the summit. And the perfect weather did come, so we were able to climb out into it, leaving our camp behind. This day involved some really excellent climbing. Again, that's the summit right behind us. Some really nice ice, some great snow and ridge climbing. As you can see Graham here. Then we got back into the deep snows, and the kind of blue collar climbing kicked back on us with just deep trenching through unconsolidated deep snow that just took a lot of work and was slow going and was often insecure. And I kind of plowed ahead that day and was very happy after a pitch of deep junk to find a nice 2 ice screw belay and hand over the lead to Graham. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark right now.
So, yeah, here we are. I'd say, you know, we all sort of felt we could taste the summit. It was just right above us. The snow conditions were starting to improve a little bit. Chris had led all morning, all day so far, and he was turning the block over to Graham, which is basically what Chris and Graham did on all the technical and hard climbing on the whole climb. And so as Graham's turn to lead, I was belaying Steve up, and Chris was belaying Graham up and left. Next slide. And Graham was up around 40 feet or so, and moving across this, you know, decent snow, when all of a sudden I hear avalanche from Chris Wright. And no sooner were we all just hammered by this slab avalanche at the belay, sucking us onto the anchor. Thank goodness it was 2 excellent screws. And it only lasted a few seconds, but it was quite powerful. It pulled us to our knees and filled every nook and cranny of our packs and, you know, pockets with wet concrete like snow. And then it was over. But as we looked out left, there was no sign of Graham. He had disappeared. The rope was bowstring tight, leading straight left over to where we'd last seen him, and then down and out of sight into some gully. And we screamed and yelled. No sound from Graham, and of course we thought the worst. But Steve, who was just reaching the belay, headed off and got over to the top of where we'd last seen Graham and yelled down, and finally we heard this faint, "I'm okay." And thank God Graham was completely unscathed, but literally hanging upside down. He had fallen down a gully, turned over a steep bulge, and was hanging upside down, had to prusik his way back up to where he could climb up on belay to Steve, where they hugged for, it seemed like forever. Everybody just so thankful that Graham was alive and uninjured, amazingly. Meanwhile, Chris and I were preparing to descend. We were starting to get the belay ready to go down, as we assumed that was be the decision. But Graham, showing just his incredible grit and toughness and fortitude, said, if you guys are okay, I want to keep going. I'm okay. I don't think I can lead anymore. I'm pretty, I'm a bit shocked from the whole fall, but I want to keep going. And so we did that. We kept going. And Graham came back, or we actually joined Steve at the belay there. The look here in Graham's eyes, I think, tells the whole story of what the ordeal he'd gone through in that over 100-foot leader fall that he took when the avalanche swept him off his stance. Just amazing that he was uninjured, but also equally amazing that he had the resolve to continue. So continue we did. Chris took the lead over again and headed out, and we got into better climbing, which was really welcome. The snow eased up. We were able to follow an icy couloir on the left side of the face that gained a couple of key pitches, and now we're right below the summit. We can't really see it because it's steep up here, and it's a long corniced ridge, but we know we are just spitting distance from it. And we get up to where we feel we can't be more than a pitch from the top, and the snow yet again turns really bad. Only now it's really bad. And at the belay, there's no real anchor. So Graham, who gets up there, digs a hole into the side of the mountain and just creates an anchor from himself. And Chris heads off, and within about 30 or 40 feet, the snow just becomes impossible. Chris, who now led all day and is, although I don't think he's physically exhausted, he's undoubtedly mentally exhausted. But he tries left, he tries right. At one point, I remember seeing him literally up to his shoulders in snow, and he's just not making any progress. And he calls down, he says, I don't know if I can go any higher, guys. I don't know what to do here. I can't make any progress. And, we're sort of like, well, maybe we just call it good here. Maybe we're just on a giant cornice. Maybe this is it, and this is the best we can do. We know we're close. At which point, Chris says, we're not on top. He knew it. He knew it was just up there. And he said, what do you want to do? And Graham at that point says, why don't you come down and maybe Mark will go up. Mark's had a lot of experience with this type of climbing in Peru. Let's at least let him go up and confirm. So Chris quickly came down. And we swapped ends. I stripped down to nothing but a Gore-Tex shell, no pack, almost no gear, just a picket and a couple of slings, and headed back up. I got back up to Chris's high point, and my first thoughts were, I'm just going to call it good here, but something inside me just said, you got to try something. So I started trenching and digging straight into the side of the mountain, and 6 feet deep in places. And the rest of my partners could hardly see what I was doing because I was dug in out of sight. But I was making some progress. I was able to sort of chimney along the side walls and pull the snow over the top of me and underneath it and just inch my way up. But it was really terrifying, actually, because I was worried, I'd fall over backwards in the loose snow and go hurtling down. And right after Graham's horrific fall earlier on, that's the last thing I wanted to do. We had one screw in, which was right off the belay. So I was looking at an 80-foot fall at least. And then the other thing I was thinking about was, if indeed we were on a cornice, I was going to break through to the other side and go hurtling over into this abyss at nearly 7,000 meters. And, you know, and I did just that, next slide, on a mountain in Peru, almost 40 years before, a mountain named Chacarajo. And had it not been for my partner, Steve Brewer, being on the other side of the ridge, we both would have perished. I kept going, inching my way up, and eventually the snow stiffened a bit, and I began to see this faint horizon, and I was able to kind of pull out of the trench and get onto my knees, and then all of a sudden I was on top. I was on top of Link Sar. Just incredible relief and excitement, and to have survived and to be finally on the top of this mountain that my partners had worked so hard to climb over 3 different attempts, and just an incredible effort that day from Chris and Graham and everyone, and so many times where we thought it was over, and here we were. So I screamed down to my partners, "I'm on top, I'm on the effing top." And there was a little bit of silence initially, and then in sort of disbelief, and then a explosion of cheers and hurrahs, and then is the room up there for us? And of course there was, and very quickly we were all on top of Link Sar. Chris first came up. He was so happy. He'd worked so hard that day, just an incredible Herculean effort, leading all day long, and doubtful at the very end whether we were going to really stand on the very top. So I really was happy for him. And I think Chris took this picture of me, and you can just see how excited I am. Steve came up next, and I'm so happy for my friend and partner of so many years. He had really been the driving force and the vision behind this project, with his 3 attempts. Over 6 months he'd spent on the glaciers below Link Sar. So I couldn't have been happier for him, well into his 60s at this point. What an amazing achievement for a guy who'd already had an incredible career. And then Graham, finally, Graham and Chris on top. Just an amazing partnership there between Graham and Chris. And so we only had about maybe an hour on top. It was already getting dark, and just and the weather had started to look bad, but just as on cue, it cleared, and we were bathed in that magnificent alpine glow with the incredible peaks of the Karakoram, the huge mountains of the Charcusa, and the distant peaks of the Karakoram Giants, all orange light, and just an incredible place to be. And spent half the night getting back to our high camp, which was quite a feat in itself, because the anchors were not good at all. In many places, having to dig deep holes to bury stuff sacks full of snow to make safe anchors. It took a lot of time and effort to be safe, but we did get back, and by late that night, and then still 3 more days to make our way all the way down to Advanced Base Camp first, where we were met by our wonderful companions, Nadim and Fida Ali, son of Rasul, who cooked an amazing feast for us, and we celebrated. And then the following day, back down to our base camp in the Kondus Valley, where we were reunited with the rest of the team and had a big celebration. And I hope, do we have the picture now, hopefully, of the whole team, with, of course, the 4 of us, and Rasul, who I think Rasul has been our cook on every Karakoram expedition all of us have ever made, going back over 30 years. And just as Steve said, not only our cook and guide and assistant and supporter, but really like our brother. And his son, Fida Ali, and Nadim, his son-in-law, were our advanced base camp cooks, and a wonderful young captain from the military who served as our liaison officer, Umair, and really a terrific team. We all got on really well, and they were a big part of our success. So I'll leave you last with a slide of the route on Link Sar, and I think it actually gives a grade, which is sort of meaningless. I don't even remember what it is without looking at the slide, but as Steve pointed out, and I concur, it's one of the, if not the most complicated mountains I've climbed in my entire life.